Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our study of the first half of Daniel chapter 11. I heard about two men that were sitting in a pub late one evening while the big screen on the TV showed a news crew that was covering a story. A man said he was going to jump off of a skyscraper. Well, one guy turned to the guy next to him and says, "I'll bet you $100 that he won't do it." Second man says, "Well, I'll take your bet," and they shook on it. Within seconds, the camera shows the man jumping and sailing through the air towards the ground, and then the camera turns away at the last possible minute, protecting viewers from that terrible sight. The first man sighed defeatedly, and then he handed the man a crisp $100 bill. The guy says, "I can't take your money. To be honest, I watched this earlier on the 6 o'clock news, so I knew he was going to jump." That guy says, "I saw the 6 o'clock news story too, but I didn't think he would do it twice." Throughout the ages, people have always been fascinated with finding out what is going to happen in the future. People who claim to be psychic or these clairvoyants prey on the gullibility of some of those people. Other people turn to horoscopes in the newspapers and they won't get out of bed until they read these things, or they'll look into the supermarket tabloids. Mankind cannot know the future with any certainty, with the exception of the prophecies that God has revealed to us within the pages of His Word. We can't even get the weather more than 50% accurate, and that's with a limited scope of within just a few days. But God sees the end from the beginning. Unlike us, He is not limited by time. He dwells outside of the boundaries of time. If you see a parade, where you stand to watch that parade dictates what you see and when you see it. If you are in the middle of the route and the parade is scheduled to travel, say a friend arrives late and says he wants to see the cheerleaders and the flag twirlers, you can say, "Well, they already passed by here, but you can go down the street a few blocks and catch up to where they are now and you'll see them." And then another friend approaches you and asks about the giant inflatable characters, if they've been by yet. And you say, "No, they're not here yet, but if you go down to where the parade begins, you will see them before they reach this spot." So you can see the present performers, you can run down the street and see what is coming soon, or you can run the other way and watch the things that have already passed. Time is like that parade. We live in the middle. We can only see clearly what is in front of us. We can read about history where others recorded what came by before we got there, but there is no way for humans to tell what is coming with certainty. We have to wait until it happens. Now imagine if you had an overhead view of that parade, say in a helicopter or something, where you could see the whole thing at the same time. You can see the beginning, the middle, and the end, and everything in between. Well, God has that perspective in life. He can see the entire picture at one time. And to prove that to mankind, there are occasions in Scripture where He will reveal what is going to happen through one of His prophets. That way, when it does happen, exactly like He said it would, we will know that God is indeed all-knowing and eternal. God has revealed many things to the prophet Daniel so far in all of these personal visions and visions given to others that Daniel had to interpret for them. Now, in chapters 10 through 12, Daniel gets the most detailed set of prophecies that I believe can be found within the entire Bible. You know, it's one thing to make a guess and to get one or two things right. People are shocked at how many things like the TV show The Simpsons, that's aired for 30 years have eventually come to pass. Well, if you have a show out for over 30 years, you're going to have some things work out, just like you said. But for everything that the Simpsons have predicted would happen, there are 3,000 or more other things that have not happened. I can easily predict that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning and every morning for the next 100 years. That's easy. But try adding some details to something like that. What days will it rain within the next 100 years? Well, I'm out. I have absolutely no idea. Add in some more details. What will be the exact temperature in every town on every day for the next 100 years? The odds are less than 0% of getting that one right. Now let's get crazy. tell you about what's going to make the news each day for the next 100 years. Which country will face which problem? Who will die? Who will be betrayed? Who will win wars? Who will lose wars? And even include what the thoughts, intentions, and actions are of people who haven't even been born yet. And you say, well, that's impossible. With man, yes. With God, no. You are about to witness the most detailed prophecies that nobody could ever predict without the precision and accuracy except for God. Only He can do this. This has been one of the most interesting chapters I have studied so far, but it's also the most difficult to take in, and it's the most difficult to process. So if you are at all like me, we're just going to have to take this a few bites at a time. We're only going to cover the first 20 verses because it'll bog us down if we try to get all of this in one sitting. So we're just going to cover the first half, but there's going to be a lot going on here. This is going to read like an ancient soap opera with all of the drama that's going on. All of what was predicted in these 20 verses has already happened. So we can see the preciseness of God's foreknowledge of events. In all, chapter 11 is said to contain 135 fulfilled prophecies. I don't know who counts these things. I'm just going to take their word for it. The goal of this study is to go from where Daniel is now up into the prophecies concerning Antiochus Epiphanes IV. If you remember chapter 7 on our study on this, we first saw that madman defiling the temple and blaspheming God, in which was a dual fulfillment prophecy. Antiochus fulfilled most of that prophecy in the time between the Old and the New Testaments, but he was a sneak preview or a foreshadow of the Antichrist that is to come in end times. So as we go through a list of events of similar sounding names, keep in mind that we are headed to this wicked man and then stopping there for this study. There will be several people by the name of Ptolemy. There will be several people by the name of Antiochus. There will be several Cleopatras. But we will try to keep these all distinguished and straight as we go through Daniel 11 verse by verse. So let's pick up with verse 1 and get started on this. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. As I said earlier, chapter 10 was the introduction for the vision that we are covering here in chapters 11 and 12. Daniel said last time that it was the third year of Cyrus of Persia's reign. Now we haven't gone back in time. This verse actually begins at the end of chapter 10. So the angel that told Daniel about all of those battles going on over the devil trying to influence the world leaders, it's that angel still talking. It's the same angel on the same subject. The angel revealed to Daniel that he has been interceding on behalf of Darius ever since Persia overthrew Babylon. That Darius was a good friend of Daniel. There were several Dariuses throughout history, but this is the one that you're familiar with from chapter 6. He was an ally to the nation of Israel. Darius and Cyrus would be the leaders that not only protected the Jewish people, but they would release them from captivity and finance their work to rebuild the temple and return the holy vessels that were taken by Babylon from the temple so long ago. According to the book of Ezra, they decreed that the full cost of rebuilding was to be paid from the royal treasury, and any violation of this edict would result in death. What other nation would ever do that for a captive people? God had his hand on that situation. So this angel was revealing that he had a part in protecting the king from demonic influence and warfare. Darius has been kind to the Hebrews, and he was rewarded with blessings. He blessed the sons of Abraham, and he was blessed by God in return. Well, we see this promised in Genesis 12:3. He says, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all families of the earth will be blessed. There are many well-documented accounts of the curses that come from cursing the descendants of Abraham. Well, about when the Greeks overran Palestine and desecrated the altar in the Jewish temple. They were soon conquered by Rome. When Rome killed the Apostle Paul and so many others and destroyed Jerusalem under the Emperor Titus, Rome fell shortly after that. Spain was reduced to a fifth-rate nation after the Spanish Inquisition against the Jews. Poland fell after the persecution of the Jews beginning in 1939. Hitler's Germany went down after the slaying of 6 million of God's people. And Britain lost her empire when she broke her faith with Israel. A nation would be wise to heed this tried and proven fact. Let us continue on in chapter 2 of Daniel, or verse 2 of Daniel 11. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a fourth will gain far more riches than all of them, and soon he becomes strong through his riches. He will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. Now let us just stop right there and set this prophecy alongside history to see how it happened, just like God predicted here. And throughout this study, we will do that. We will have the prophecy and we will have the historical fulfillment. So he was told 3 more kings would arise, which is after Cyrus. You have Cambyses II that reigned for 8 years. There was one called Pseudo-Smerdis who reigned for less than a year in 522 BC. Then after him, Darius the Great, also went by the name Darius Hystaspes, not the Darius that Daniel knew, not the Darius from the lion's den. Then we are told that a 4th king would be exceedingly wealthy. That would be King Xerxes I. You might recognize his name from the book of Esther. Verse 2 said he would rouse the whole empire of Persia to fight Greece. If they had only read the book of Daniel, which was available by then, they would have known that Persia would fall to Greece and Greece would fall to Rome. We have seen that so far in so many visions that Daniel had, but he tried anyway. The Greek historian Herodotus said that the army of Xerxes consisted of 5,283,220 men, and that's besides the Carthaginians consisting of 300,000 men and 200 ships. That's a lot for that time. He started out strong, but he was met with fierce resistance. Some of these battles you might be familiar with. At the Battle of Thermopylae, it's a small force of Greek warriors led by King Leonidas of Sparta. He resisted the much larger Persian forces, but they were ultimately defeated. If you've ever seen the movie 300, it was based on this battle. Had it not been for a betrayal, the Persians would have failed. Following that battle, there was a great naval battle in 480 BC, the Battle of Salamis, and that resulted in the defeat of Xerxes' naval forces, and it was followed by additional losses, which led to Xerxes just giving up and stopping all attempts to conquer Greece. Now, why do you suppose that this Persian king had so many curses, unlike Darius, who was blessed, unlike Cyrus, who enjoyed God's blessing? What happened in the book of Esther? At the counsel of a single man, Haman, the king authorized the extermination of the Jewish nation. But of course, if you've read the book, you know that God stepped in and stopped it. But Xerxes' true colors showed that day. He cursed the children of Abraham, and he himself was cursed. Let's continue on in verses 3 and 4. And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides them. If you've been awake at all during our studies of Daniel so far, you have an idea of who this mighty king is in verse 3, Alexander the Great. Daniel has mentioned him several times, but this is nothing new to a student of the book of Daniel. Neither is verse 4, saying that as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom will be broken up. Alexander conquered most of the known world in a few short years, and he died at an early age. The prophecy of this chapter doesn't go much deeper into Alexander because he did no harm to the Jewish people. nor Jerusalem. He conquered the entire known world, but yet Jerusalem was untouched, and the people retained religious freedom unopposed by him. Does that not seem like somebody showed Alexander the Great a copy of the book of Daniel and showed him the part that mentions him specifically right here, and he heeded that warning? That's kind of what it looks like, doesn't it? Actually, that is what happened, according to the Jewish historian Josephus. David Guzik made mention of this in his commentary and quoted from Josephus's book, and I had to go get my copy from my personal library, which it's in the Antiquities of the Jews. If you have a copy of it, Book 11, Chapter 8. I won't put out the whole chapter here, but I want to share one part with you from the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. It says, Alexander the Great was on his way, but God had sent him a vision of a procession of priests greeting him in a certain manner. The priests were also compelled by God to go out and greet Alexander in such a manner. When it happened, just like in the vision, God had Alexander's full attention. Those who were with him wanted him to raid the temple and torture the high priest, but Alexander forbid it. They believed that he had lost his mind. He proceeded to tell his men about his vision, and he went to greet these priests. And here is the portion I wanted to share with you from my copy of the complete works of Josephus. It says, and when he had said this to Parmenio and had given the high priest his right hand, the priest ran along by him, and he came into the city, and he went into the temple, and he offered sacrifice to God, according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priest. And when the book of Daniel was shown to him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks would destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude that was present, but the next day called them to him, and he bade them to ask what favors they pleased of him. Whereupon the high priest desired that they may enjoy the laws of their forefathers, and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. He granted all they desired, and when they entreated him that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, he willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. So out of all of these people mentioned in these prophecies, at least one of them read the Bible, or at least the book of Daniel. Of course, Alexander the Great didn't read the part about him dying at a young age with no heirs, obviously, but at least he's seen that God had predicted he was going to be the one to overtake Persia, so he left God's people alone. Now, when we get into the portion of this prophecy that concerns the end times and the Great Tribulation, I have no doubt that a great many people who will be left behind are going to read these prophecies that are in Daniel, that are in Revelation, just so they can see what is coming next and that they can prepare for it. But if only they would read it now and act upon God's offer of salvation now, they can avoid that era of suffering completely. If only they would read and act upon the Word of God and its warnings now. Alexander should have taken a closer look at verse 4, where it said his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out to the 4 points of the compass, though not his own descendants. Alexander did have 3 people that could have possibly been heirs. He had a half-brother named Philip, but he was mentally deficient. There was a son that was born after Alexander died, and then there was also an illegitimate son named Hercules. But amidst a ton of drama, the empire ended up going to his 4 generals, as we've covered already a couple times. We covered who each of those 4 were and where they ruled, but this time we're only going to focus on 2 of those 4 generals, and Scripture is going to hone in on these 2 like a laser this time. The reason it only covers these 2 is that these 2 are the only ones concerning Israel and Daniel's people. So now, let's look at these incredible details that God revealed to Daniel about these two kingdoms many, many years ahead of time. So we'll read a couple verses, and then I'll show you in history, or tell you in history, how all of these were fulfilled. So let's go ahead and get verses 5 and 6. Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His domain will be a great dominion indeed. After some years they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up, along with those who brought her in, to the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. To begin with, these two kingdoms were Syria, which was ruled by Seleucus, one of Alexander's generals, and Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy, another one of Alexander's generals. Throughout the most of this, it's going to be all about Seleucus versus Ptolemy, Syria versus Egypt. Donald Campbell said the wars between these dynasties greatly affected the Jews because they were between the anvil and the hammer. They were just kind of playing tug-of-war with Israel, seeing who was going to control them in all of their battles with each other. Now we've got to pay attention here and not get bogged down by the rapid succession of these rulers. Egypt had a rule at that time of that dynasty that all of the males are to be named Ptolemy, and all of the females must be named Berenice or Cleopatra. There will be a few different people by these names, as with Seleucus, as we get closer and closer to where we stop today with Antiochus Epiphanes IV. But to keep it simple, the Seleucids are identified as the kings of the north, the Ptolemies were the kings of the south. Verse 5 said that one would rise and gain dominion. This was fulfilled in Ptolemy the First of Egypt, who was the first of this episode of Jerry Springer that's going to gain control over Israel. Verse 6 comes in after about a 30-year gap from that, and after the death of the previous kings, it spoke of this proposed alliance. It said the king's daughter from the south will marry the king of the north. That was fulfilled in the marriage between Antiochus II, who was of the Seleucids, and Berenice, who was daughter of Ptolemy II. Then there's a small problem, though. That king already had a wife. So Antiochus II took his first wife, Laodice, and put her away to marry Berenice from Egypt. But that's not going to last, because the second sentence there in verse 6 says, "But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power." Now this is where it starts to get really crazy. When Laodice was put away, the true wife of the north, her sons were removed from the royal line. And Berenice from the south, her son was placed as heir. But when Berenice's dad, the king of Egypt, died, Antiochus II in the north says, well, I don't need her anymore. He divorces his new wife, and he brings Laodice back. But being the loving, forgiving wife that Laodice was known to be, I'm kidding, she poisoned her husband, the king. Then she proceeded to kill Berenice. She killed Berenice's son and her attendants for good measure, fulfilling the part in verse 6 that said, "But she will be given up along with those who brought her in." Not a real nice lady. So she sets her son, the original rightful heir, Laodice sets her son on the throne, bringing us to the ruler Seleucus II in the north. Now that should go over well with Egypt, right? I mean, after their king dies, he just divorces that previous king's daughter and sends her back. Or in fact, ends up killing her. But let us see in this prophecy how Egypt dealt with that, and then how history came to fulfill that. Let's go ahead and get verses 7 through 9. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them with a display great strength. Also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold he will take into captivity to Egypt, and he on his part will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. Verse 7 spoke of Egyptian revenge. One of the descendants of her line, which was the woman who was killed, will arise in his place, and he will come against them and enter the fortress of the north and deal with them. Berenice's brother Ptolemy III succeeded their father as king in Egypt and set out to avenge his sister's murder by invading the north and having Laodice killed. And poor Israel just sat right in between these nations as they're going back and forth. Verse 8 also predicts, that says, also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold will be taken into captivity to Egypt. The historian Jerome tells us that he took back 4,000 talents of gold, 40,000 talents of silver, and 2,500 idols, and he also looted the treasury. Now, oddly enough, verses 8 and 9 end up with him going home to enjoy the spoils of war and leaving his enemy alone for quite some time. Keep in mind that all of this is taking place during that 400-year period between the Old and the New Testaments, when people tend to say that God was silent. God didn't have to say anything. He had already written the script. He is telling it to us here in Daniel 11, and the people were on this stage in between the Testaments performing exactly as God said the story would unfold. So let's go a little bit further into this drama-filled soap opera and then see how it was all fulfilled in history. Let's get verses 10 through 12. His sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to this very fortress. Then the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. Now the stage is being set for the ultimate defiler, the ultimate wicked person, and we're getting closer to him, which will be our stopping point. So hang in there with me. I hope I haven't run off and left you. Verse 10 spoke of the coming arrival of this madman. His sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will just keep on coming. Now Seleucus II in the north fought against Egypt for years, and then his two sons took over. In 223 BC, Seleucus III was assassinated, and his brother Antiochus III, who would soon become known as Antiochus III the Great, took over. Now Antiochus III in the north waged continual war against the king of the south, the Ptolemies. Just like the prophecy noted, the plural sons became singular. Antiochus III managed to regain possession of Israel during the battle with Egypt. Now, verse 11 says the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight. Wouldn't you know, history says the same thing. In an attempt to recapture the territory he lost in the north, Ptolemy IV attacked Antiochus III on the southern borders of Israel. This was in the Battle of Raphia, June 22nd of 217 BC. I told you this is a lot of names going back and forth, and it's the north and south battling back and forth, but I just want to show you how God predicts something is going to happen hundreds of years before it comes to pass, and it does. So this guy right here, Ptolemy IV, he should have read the book of Daniel. He would have known shown that he is not going to win. Verse 11 said, even though he raised a big multitude, he is still going to lose. That large multitude mentioned in verse 11 was the large Syrian army, which had 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 103 war elephants. All of these were raised by Antiochus III. Now, the historian Polybius records a funny fact about this battle. He said that Ptolemy's elephants were of the African forest elephants. Those of Antiochus were mainly the larger Syrian elephants that he had brought in from India. According to the historian Polybius, it says the African elephants could not stand the smell, the sound, and the view of the Indian elephants and would run away and trample things. Now, later on, he attacked again and he won, and he nearly depleted the entire army of Antiochus III, and he made him flee into the desert. But verse 12 says, when the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall. Ptolemy IV was proud, and thus he did not pursue the military advantage that he had had. Even though he had caused tens of thousands of Syrian soldiers to fall, he didn't pursue Antiochus into the desert. This will come back to bite him in verse 13. Let's go ahead and get verses 13 through 16. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land, with destruction in his hand. In verse 13, we see that the king of the north decided to take advantage of a bad situation in the south. Around 201 BC, about 15 years or so after losing to Egypt, Antiochus III returns with a much larger army. He has Philip V of Macedon and the Macedonian army backing him up, and he was able to beat the Egyptians. They were under the rule of Ptolemy V. Now, Ptolemy V, that 5 not only stands for the number of Ptolemies so far in that Ptolemaic dynasty, but also his age when he became king. That king came to the throne as a mere child, and the reign began in the face of all of these internal rebellions and all of these foreign invasions and wars. That's the perfect time for your enemies to reassemble and unexpectedly retaliate. Verse 14 spoke of some of Daniel's own people. A group called the Violent Ones would get involved and join the fight against Egypt. They believed that they could gain more freedom if Antiochus III seceded, but that did not happen. He ended up betraying and conquering them too. Now, in even more amazing detail, verse 15 added, "Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city." And of course, history reveals that this angel was batting 1,000 in the prophecy department. The fortified city of Sidon was besieged and captured around 199 BC. After that, just like verse 16 says, nobody could withstand Antiochus III, and the Ptolemies from Egypt never won against him again. So this left Israel under the control of Antiochus III, and that set the stage for the terror of Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Let us go ahead and go on into verses 17 and 19. He will set his face to come with power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect, and he will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So he will turn his face towards the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. So verse 17 tells us of another marriage alliance that's going to go on. But the outcome was not what Antiochus III expected. It says he will give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she's not going to take a stand for him nor be on his side. Apparently, Antiochus III was feeling the growing threat of Rome, so he decided to ally with Egypt, and he offered his daughter Cleopatra I to Ptolemy V in 192 BC. Now remember, Ptolemy V was a 5-year-old king. Antiochus III clearly hoped that Cleopatra would remain loyal to her father and would be a staunch advocate for Syria in the north, and then would give Antiochus III control over Egypt, give her dad control over Egypt. However, Cleopatra consistently sided with her husband, the boy king Ptolemy V, and she went against her father. Now remember, Ptolemy V was just a little boy, and it also sickens me to add, so was this little girl, Cleopatra I. Now again, this is not the famous Cleopatra from the popular movies, but one in a long list that bore that name. It says the daughter of women in verse 17, referring to Antiochus's daughter, because at that time she was still a child. And she was still under the care of her mother and a nurse. Just really, really sickening. God had predicted in verse 18 that he will turn his face to the coastlands. Antiochus III had subdued most of the coastal areas and the islands around the Mediterranean Sea. But the rest of verse 18 says that conquest will be short-lived. It said, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. The Roman commander Lucius Cornelius Scipio was sent against Antiochus III, forcing him to stop and withdraw and take refuge in Antioch, and that resulted in him being disgraced. 30,000 Roman troops defeated his much larger army of 70,000 at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC. The Greek historian Polybius recorded that Antiochus III had to surrender land to Rome, he had to release hostages, and then he had to pay a very hefty tribute to them. Well, he didn't have the money to pay that tribute to the Romans, so he thought he was going to rob the temple at Emmaus, only to be murdered by those guarding the city. If only he would have read verse 19 that predicted he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Let's get one more amazing verse out of this prophecy, Daniel 11:20. Then in his place one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. In the last verse of this part of this study, God had the angel tell Daniel of one more ruler that would be very short-lived. Antiochus III had 2 sons. The oldest was named Seleucus IV, and the youngest was Antiochus IV, that wicked man that'll be the focus of the next part of this chapter. In a remarkable display of the foreknowledge of God, verse 20 said that the one that arises to replace him would be an oppressor. Other translations call him a tax collector or a raiser of taxes. He was forced to pay a tribute to the Romans of 1,000 talents annually. Now, in order to raise this large amount of money, Seleucus had to tax all of the lands under his domain. Tax revenue couldn't even do the job, though, so he planned to go ahead and just pillage the Jerusalem temple. But then he backed down when his ambassador had an angelic vision warning him not to do so. If you want to look that up, if you have a copy of the Apocrypha, you can find most of this in 2 Maccabees chapter 3. Now, the verse gives us a rather vague and unceremonious end to that ruler. It says, "Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle." So there's no battle glory, no honor, no act of heroism, not even any certainty about his murder. Now, some say Antiochus Epiphanes had killed him. Some say it was his own tax collector, Heliodorus, I think was his name. They think that maybe he poisoned him and seized the throne for himself. There was a true heir, Demetrius the First, the son of Seleucus, but he was imprisoned in Rome as a hostage, and the kingdom was seized by Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus managed to oust Heliodotus and an infant son of Seleucus and become the formal head of state for a few years until they simply had him murdered. And thus begins the evil spree of this madman who was just so wicked that he foreshadows the coming hell-fired Antichrist. But enough about him for now. I just want to end by saying that this prophecy given to Daniel is just so incredibly detailed and so far has been fulfilled with perfect accuracy down to the last punctuation mark. I apologize if you're not a fan of history, but it just amazes me to see God predict something and then it come to pass. So with that said, everything that God said here has come true in perfect clarity, in perfect precision, in perfect detail. With that being said, how much more seriously should we study and learn the prophecies that pertain to the near future for our time? Like it says in Isaiah 46, there is none like God, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things not yet done. I look forward to seeing you in the next study as we conclude chapter 11 of Daniel.